Hey everyone, hope everyone's having a great day and having a great week and looking forward to doing some fun things this weekend. I'm not sure what weather you're going to have where you are, but it's supposed to be pretty nice here, so I'm looking forward to that. But right now, I've got a live stream planned that I have been looking forward to doing for quite some time. I started this one thinking about doing it as like a newsletter article first. Then I was going to do a video on it, but never quite got it to come together. So I'm excited to get this thing going as a live stream so that we can actually do some discussion here and get thoughts from everybody else on it. Hey, Emmy, please correct me. I know that you were here last time too, and I think I butchered your name, so I apologize for that. So let me know if I'm saying that incorrectly. This one is what I want to do here is take a look at some reviews from 4th edition from back when it was first released, because we all hear the things that people have to say about D&D 4th edition now, and you know how awful it is, and all those standard things that we get. But when we dig into it, we find out a lot of those folks maybe haven't even played the game, or they are just perpetuating some things that they've heard about the game. There are certainly people that have played it and it's not for them, and that's fine. But you know, it's hard to say when you're 15 years past when it was released, if it was if these are what people have thought all along actually, or if it's just the things that have come up over the years. So I want to go back and actually look at some reviews that came out at the time and see what people had to say right then, and let's see what how that compares to what we hear today, and if there's anything different, and you know, let's talk about them. So I'm excited to get into that and see what they say, and get everybody's thoughts on it. So yeah, I think the double vowels are definitely throwing me off. So Emi, L as in elevated, M as in moon, okay, as an I. So E as an L, Emmy. So Emmy, I guess I was right. Emmy? Okay. So I think that's the plan, is we're going to take a look at these reviews, and I did put them in the links to these reviews in the description. So if anybody wants to take a look at them, if you didn't already, you can while we're going through them. I will pull them up on the screen and we can talk through them. I read through them, and I didn't filter these like you know, find like the best reviews or anything like that. I literally did a search in Google and for reviews of D&D 4th edition from before 2010, and I kind of just went down from the top results that I had. I skipped over a few that didn't look like they were written in a more formal review style, so I picked basically kind of the first 3 that looked like it was somebody who actually did a formal review. So that's the one I went with. The links to them are in the description, so you can pull those up and see. But yeah, that's the plan. We'll go through it, and I'd be very interested to see what everyone's thoughts are on what we come across here. So before we get into it, just please do subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Like the video, because that will definitely help with the algorithm. And if you want to help the channel in other ways, check out the description. I've got some affiliate links down there that you could use to helping out if you're going to be making some purchases at Noble Knight Games or Amazon and other places. And then there's some other things in there like the newsletter that you can also do to help me out, just to show your support. So please check that out as well. I really appreciate it. But most of all, I'm happy that everybody's here so we can have a nice conversation about this. So let's jump into it. Hey, Zuglitz. I hope I'm saying that one right. I'm getting challenged today on the names. I apologize for that. So, but I'll go with Zuglitz until you tell me otherwise. Welcome. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to flip over and we'll go to the first review that was on the list. So this one, I gotta get to the top here. This one is from a blog called Gnome Stew. I'm not familiar with the blog, so I don't know if this is one that is still around and active, or if these are if most of the stuff on here is old. So I'm not sure if anybody else has been viewing it, but they put together a good review, and you'll notice that this one is from June 6th of 2008. That is, aside from being the anniversary of D-Day, it is also the exact date that D&D 4th edition was released. The 3 core rulebooks were released on June 6, 2008. just, the interesting thing about fourth edition is that it wasn't like the current games where we have months and months or even years of playtesting going on. It was announced in August of 2007 that they were going to be coming out with a new version. And I think there were maybe some leaks of different things along the way, but not really anything official. They did release the Wizards Presents races and classes and heroes and monsters, I think, or worlds and monsters. But there weren't any rules in there, no mechanics. It was more just kind of a behind the scenes look at what they were doing. The first real glimpse at fourth edition was in May of 2008 when Keep on the Shadowfell was released, along with some quick start rules, but it was like 5 pages of rules. And then pre-generated characters. So it was really just barely a glimpse at what was to come. So June 6, 2008 was the date that all 3 core rule books were released, and that was really the first glimpse anybody had into this game. So hey Sean, welcome. So you're one of the ones that you were into D&D at the time and were able to actually get them on the day, which is nice. I didn't get into D&D until a few years later, so I missed out on that opportunity, but so very well of when these were released. So that's this review here based on me looking through it. He basically stayed up and read through all of the books and wrote down his thoughts on each of the books, and he goes through each one and gives what he likes about them and some of the things. So so let's take a look at it and see. And I've got a few notes. Like I said, I read through them already. So I made a few notes just to kind of keep the conversation going, and we'll just kind of scroll through it and see what they have to say. So see, I wish I could get better stats, with Paizo and Wizards not being public companies, you don't get the level of detail in their sales figures that you'd like to actually compare it. And that's probably by design. They're probably happy about that. But I wish that, we could get a little bit of a better glimpse at it, but I think we can probably deduce just based on the market share that even fourth edition selling much less than third edition and fifth edition, Wizards and D&D have such a huge percentage of the market that a bad performing edition of the game is still going to outperform any of the other people in the market as well. Because if you look at the distribution, 3/4 of the market is D&D, and then all of the other players make up the final 25%, which with Paizo being the biggest player in that. But I do feel like that with fourth edition, even fourth edition not selling very well, it's still probably outsold everything else that was out there. So okay, I played my first game of D&D in it was probably 85. But I don't even know what version it was because it was just a thing at school and I didn't know anything about it. I played like a couple sessions with somebody, so it could have been any one of the first edition variants. But I don't remember it well enough to say which one it was, but I enjoyed it and always thought about it afterwards, but it was a good, almost 25 years before I actually then got into it again. So unfortunately I wish I'd, stuck with it or found a group. So the first thing that I think this person's name is Martin has to say in looking at it is that he's coming from it from a DM's perspective, which fourth edition is just a perfect game for fourth edition, for Dungeon Masters, because it is written for Dungeon Masters and provides really great tools for Dungeon Masters to create encounters and to run encounters and campaigns and everything. So that's the perspective he's coming from right off the bat. He says that he enjoys the layout of the books, starting with the player's handbook is the first one he's going to look at. And what he likes is that it's written like an instruction manual. He actually says that it's written as though it's a programmer's guide, like for HTML or PHP. And he actually likes that, which I think is something I've heard before from other people about fourth edition, that the rules are very clearly written. They're explained in a way where there's not a lot of fluff in there that you got to filter through. It's just, there's the rules and that's the way people like them. So I definitely appreciate that as well. He does mention the artwork, which I thought was interesting because a lot of people have complained about the artwork. I love the artwork in 4th edition. I think the artwork in 4th edition is wonderful. He does as well. He thinks the artwork, it looks good. And he was a little thought at first that the artwork was that there wasn't as much, but it turns out that there was just as much. So and he likes it. So I personally do like the artwork as well. I think it's as good as any of the other editions that I've seen. Hey, Haley. So telling people, see, it's funny you should say that, because when I didn't actually get into D&D until 2012, and I went and bought at my local game store. I went to the game store knowing nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, and I talked to somebody there and I said, hey, I want to get into D&D. What should I get? And they brought me back to the section where they had all the role-playing games. And he pulls out what I find out later is the Essentials Red Box starter set for 4th edition. And as he's giving it to me, though, he tells me that I really should do Pathfinder instead. I shouldn't do 4th edition. I should do Pathfinder. Now, certainly by 2012, they had already announced that 4th edition was going away and they were going to do another version after that. But, kind of a similar experience to you, and that the game store itself was steering me towards Pathfinder instead of 4th edition. But being the purist that I am, I was set on, I wanted to play D&D, and I didn't know I'd never heard of Pathfinder before. So, but I had heard of D&D, so that's the one I got, and that's the one I loved, and I'm glad I did. So then he gets into the player's handbook, and he goes into each book in detail and talks about what he finds about each of them that he likes. So talking specifically about the player's handbook, he specifically calls out that he likes the fact that you have powers now, and that all of your core spells that a wizard would use are actually in the form of powers. So, which makes it much simpler to use, and everything is now contained in the player's handbook for that class. So when you're a wizard, you go to the wizard section of the player's handbook, and all the stuff that you can do is contained right there. You don't have to flip back and forth to where the spells are and pull up other information. So he liked the layout that they had there for that. Similar thing with magic items being in the player's handbook, made it so that the players could actually look at magic items without having to get or borrow a Dungeon Master's Guide, which seems, in hindsight, seems like a good deal. So, sorry, I need to check something here. And okay. So that was one thing that he liked. Let's see, I'm trying to think, what else did he have in here? Lots of the simplification. So this is one that I've, it's one of the ones where you kind of you hear different things. Some people say it's too complicated. Other people say it's too simple. I think every single version of the game, I've heard people saying that stuff. Whether it's 3rd edition, 5th edition, 4th edition, or any of the prior editions, some are complaining that it's too hard to play. Other people saying that it's not detailed enough. So, but here he likes the simplifications. I think the powers were good. He likes how they simplified healing and how they simplified how much hit points you get at each level. The skill system was definitely knocked down by reducing the number of skills and how you become proficient in those skills. Opportunity attacks no longer require you to confirm your crit. So all really simple stuff that they took a lot of the complexity and got rid of it. Passive perception, I didn't really think about that as being a thing that they had, that was maybe new to 4th edition. Something that they, I know that you can do a take 10 in like 3.5 and in Pathfinder and stuff. So, but I guess 4th edition was the first one that had the passive abilities checks. And so that's what, and we still have that in 5th edition. So yeah, I could see definitely coming from 3.5 that Pathfinder is essentially the same. I've never actually played 3.5. I've played 3rd edition. I went at a game store one time, that was what they played. And so I played that. This was after I think this might've even been after 5th edition came out, but, so I played 3rd edition and then I played Pathfinder, but I never actually played 3.5 proper of D&D. So, So yeah, and Emmy. So the fourth edition on the the realism. That's one of the things. It depends what kind of game you want, And I think I talked about that in the last stream. The whole thing about verisimilitude. How real is it? And I look at it from the standpoint of we're playing a fantasy game, and so naturally things are going to be. You're going to have to kind of set some realism aside in order to make room for the fantastical things that are going to happen. How much you're willing to set them aside, it depends on each person and each table. Some people are more willing to accept certain things. I'm willing to take it a little farther than other people are. So it really just depends what you're after. And so yeah, I can understand that with some of the powers. It's definitely was different from what they'd done before. Oh yeah, so advantage and disadvantage, Stefano. Yeah, they. I think I can't remember where in the books it is, but it does have a thing. It wasn't called advantage and disadvantage. I think I thought it was called something else, but it does have some stuff in there for that. So you kind of get that first little taste of it. Same with like backgrounds. You had character backgrounds, very, very minimal character backgrounds in fourth edition. So you kind of get these little bit of things that they were experimenting with that went right into fifth edition as some pretty big things. So yeah, Haley, perfect, spot on comparison, which is playing as the Avengers instead of common people. That's the biggest thing, is that if you're wanting to play as regular people that happen to have some special things they can do, then other games might be better for you. Fourth edition is supposed to be a game about people doing fantastical things and with special abilities and everything. So, and if that's not your cup of tea, then I can understand that, how the game might not sit well with you. So, so trying to scroll down. Oh, see, I kind of covered some of the things with like hit points and skills. The D20 mechanic. Oh, that was the other thing, is to talk about how you roll a D20 for everything in fourth edition. So there's no saving throws. You're actually doing a D20 against some other value. So you can do a check against armor class or against fortitude or reflex or will. And so that simplifies the attack process, because you don't have to say, oh, what do I do for this particular power or thing? It's always going to be the same. So the mechanics of it are more streamlined, which you'd think would make the battles run a little bit faster, because you're not having to spend time thinking about what you actually have to do. It's the process is the same, but obviously there's other things that go into having it take a little longer. And let's see, what else did he have on here? So he touches on the powers quite a bit, which I think obviously that's the biggest thing in the game. And I think he actually makes the point, that's the biggest impact on the game is the fact that they did these powers. I don't think anybody would argue with that assessment. He does mention that doing combat without a battle map would be a challenge and would be time consuming. And there's not any rules in the game for you to do combat without a battle map. It's really expected that you're going to have a battle map. Which I can understand that. I know that when I played the game, a lot of those kind of small encounters would take longer than they should, because you kind of have to bring out a battle mat to really take advantage of the powers that you're going to use. I feel like with some homebrewing and a little bit of, if the game had stuck around longer, we may have gotten some more rules that actually allowed you to do some combat stuff without using a battle map, so that we might have been able to explore that. But it was just kind of, it came and went so fast, there wasn't really a chance for that. The interesting thing is that he has a whole section here talking about the whole video game thing, which I think is really interesting, because that's like the biggest comparison that people put out there, is they say that fourth edition is just basically World of Warcraft. It's an MMO, it's a video game, whatever you want to say. This is the one that comes up over and over and over again. And I think he's got like an interesting take on it, that there's, I believe it's him that has the one where it says that, this is not a bad thing. The fact that the game takes some influence from a video game is perfectly fine, because the video games have been taking their influence from tabletop role-playing games forever. So that's where they're based on. So it's only logical to think then that the tabletop role-playing games might take some influence from the video games, and it kind of goes in a cycle. So, there's a lot of fun things in the video games. And so if you take some of those play styles and you bring them into a tabletop setting, that's not really a bad thing just on the surface. So, he's got a whole write-up talking about that. And then he goes into talking about the roles for each class and how, specifically pointing out that there's no mechanical stuff that ties you to that particular role, but that it helps to align you to what the character is probably going to do anyway. And I find it really interesting that these are actually things that I know have come up in conversations, that on these discussions on the streams and in the posts that I've put out there, a lot of people have pointed these things out, that it's like, that these things that people complain about, like having character roles, they didn't really do anything. They didn't lock you into anything. And it was really just kind of putting a name on something that already existed anyway. So I find it interesting. So here's someone looking at the book on the day it came out and is reaching that same conclusion. So at ESCO, I see, unarmed combat. Was there not were there not rules for unarmed combat? That's one of those that I don't know that I ever came across in my fourth edition days, that there wasn't anything for able to do that. I swear there was a feat for that, but maybe I might be confusing it with one of the other games. I might have been confusing it with Pathfinder or 5th edition. So, but that's something that I'm a little surprised that if it didn't have that it wouldn't have had unarmed combat. Being as combat focused as it was, you'd think that it would have all different variants. So yeah, Sean, exactly right. Video games are pretty popular. So the fact that you'd want to make your game kind of emulate video games and get some of those people that play video games to come back doesn't seem like that's a bad thing. So. And so Les, that's the same thing I have, the people, the 5e games that I've played, any game, all the games that I've played, it really depends on what your table is after. If you're at a table, I've been at tables where people are just wanting to do all that kind of video gamey type stuff and have those superheroes and things like that. And other tables that we're a little more, we'll say Game of Thrones like, in that it's a little more gritty and you don't have quite so much of that sort of stuff. Sure. Okay. That's going to be preference. And, I go back to my old thing. That's like, just because it's not for you doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's not for you. So if people, don't want to play that kind of game, then yeah, maybe 4th edition wasn't for them, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad game. It just, it tried to do a certain thing. It looked at what was going on in the world and what people were liked and said, you know what, let's fix some of these issues with 3.5. Let's look at some of the things that people are liking from video games. Let's try to redo the rules so that they're really streamlined and people like them. And, and that's what we'll do. And so, and they did it. So, and then it turns out people didn't like that. So I know we can get into all the details of why that is, some other time, but, clearly a lot of the things that you hear today as complaints were recognized at the time, but I find it interesting that, particularly in this one, the complaint about it being video gamey is actually coming across as, that's not a big deal. And, but now if you hear people say it and it's like that was the thing that killed it. So, clearly that was not the case. So, so then he goes on to the Dungeon Master's Guide, and sorry, I apologize. There's some bad language in there. I didn't realize that when I looked through it the first time. So, so he goes in, and a lot of what he has to say here in this section is one of the things that is my favorite thing about 4th edition, and that is it is made for dungeon masters. Everything about this game was written so that dungeon masters could put together campaigns and encounters and actually run the tables as efficiently and effectively as possible. There's so much stuff in the Dungeon Master Guide and the Dungeon Master's Guide 2 that are really geared towards dungeon masters, and the way that everything is laid out is just it's a dungeon masters game, much more so than 5th edition is. Hey, Francesco, glad to see you again out there. Welcome. So you actually got into D&D because of World of Warcraft, so that's perfect. So it ties right into all of that. So he goes into then, he talking about that whole focus on being a dungeon master and how this book is really geared towards it. He actually covers the very first part of this book, talking about some very specific things about that it's that everyone at the table needs to have a role in making the game enjoyable, that it's not the dungeon master's job to entertain everybody, but that everybody needs to contribute to this, which I think is really interesting. I think there's actually comments to that effect even back in the Advanced D&D Dungeon Master's Guide. I seem to recall reading that. So I don't think that's a new thing for 4th edition, but it certainly caught his eye as he was reading through the books. So that's interesting. And I would definitely agree that the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guides are much more useful than the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. I didn't come in until after 3rd edition, so I don't really spend a lot of time in the 3rd edition books, but I spend a lot more time looking at the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, even when I'm putting together 5th edition campaigns and encounters. So definitely that's its sweet spot. And then he goes into he loves the part about how they got tips on how to prepare for a session, how to keep the different types of players engaged based on what they enjoy from the game. That's a section of the book that I particularly like too, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, where it goes through all the different types of players, and then but not only just tells you what they are, but it actually gives you things that says, in order to keep this player engaged, here's the things that you should do. And that's like great things for the dungeon master to know, that as they're building the encounter and the campaigns, here's the types of things. If I can identify who my players are, then I can take that and build my encounter and my campaign to take advantage of that. So that particular piece is something I use, and he points that out in his assessment as well. And he, when talking about the artwork, he actually points out the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide cover, which I think might be my favorite cover of like any dungeon master, or not even dungeon master, of any D&D book, with the dragon looking at the crystal ball that has the cover from the player's handbook inside of it, the artwork from the cover. I think that is like a awesome reference to have on the cover of the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I really love that. That's one of my favorite covers of like all D&D books. Okay, so unarmed fighting is listed under improvised weapons then. So I guess you kind of have to, look at the rules. It doesn't come out and say that there's unarmed combat, but there are some things in there maybe that you can use to satisfy that requirement if you're looking to do that. So it has unarmed attack damage, and there's actions for bull rushing and grabbing and charging. So there it does have some stuff in there, but maybe not quite as obvious as it is in other versions. So let's go. So good. Thanks for checking that out and sharing that with everybody. So let's see, what do we got? So then we get into, so we did the combat encounters. So then he talks about how to build the encounters, and the fact that monsters have roles as well in 4th edition. Not only do the characters have roles, but the monsters have roles. So, and you can use those to help build balanced encounters. I actually did a video about this just a few weeks ago, talking about the different monster roles, and so that you had a lot of variety of monsters, and it would help you to build encounters that were appropriate, because you didn't just have like a goblin that had all kinds of stuff that it could do. You had a goblin that was an archer, but then you had a separate goblin that was for melee, and then you had a separate one that was more of a boss monster. So you could pick and choose which ones you wanted, and it allowed you to build these encounters exactly the way that you needed for the party that you had. So you didn't end up with a bunch of monsters in there, then you say, oh crap, that's not really going to work for me. Those roles really helped you to identify exactly what mix of monsters you wanted to have in each encounter to keep it interesting. He then gets into skill challenges, and I know last time we had a long conversation about skill challenges on our stream last week. And, you know, I think as a general rule, the consensus with skill challenges is that the idea of them is okay. The idea of putting some rules around role playing seems to be a good idea. There's not a lot of complaints about that. The implementation of it in 4th edition was not necessarily ideal. I think it was kind of the best thing that they came up with, but I would change some things if I was putting it together. Here in his review, though, he doesn't complain about it. He seems to be interested to see how it comes out, because he talks about the type of thing like climbing up a mountain, and how normally you'd say, okay, every 10 feet you climb, you just got to do a check to see if you succeeded, and if you fail, then you're going to fall. And it kind of just becomes you're just rolling dice. By doing a skill challenge, you introduce other things that the person can do as they're climbing the wall to try to see if they can advance up the wall. And if they do a challenge to, you know, like a nature check, for instance, to see if they can find some handholds in the ice or the rock. And if they succeed, then, you know, it's not just you just rolled a check. It's actually a thing that you're doing to try to see if you can succeed at the task. So he goes into it with more kind of an open mind of saying, you know, well, we'll see how this goes. It seems like it is a way that can make it more interesting. So I like the fact that he goes into it, you know, being willing to consider it as something that would be an improvement. The section here talking about adventures, he's got some really good stuff in there where he mentions that they have stat blocks for your traps and your hazards, which is something that I also love about the game. I love that everything basically has a stat block. So everything that you encounter has something that's an obstacle for you. And it has powers in the same way that you have powers. They're obviously different if it's a trap or something like that. But the fact that, you know, a trap is treated the same as a monster really helps you to run that, because you got that consistency in how you're going about things. So whether you're facing a monster, you're facing, you know, a pit trap, you've got that same flow of things in your head. So I like the way that they do that. And he points out that he likes that as well. Yeah. Monster rolls. Hey, Trenell, monster rolls are one of my favorite things. Like I said, I have a video that I just did recently about it. I think, I don't know why some of the things that didn't get into 5th edition, I don't understand. I can understand some things that were maybe a little too specific to 4th edition, but those are just things that just seemed like a really good idea. And I guess it's the type of thing where they needed to completely move on from 4th edition, they felt, so they didn't bring a lot of stuff over, though some of that stuff is now getting into the 2024 rules, and we've already seen some of the stuff get into the Pathfinder 2nd edition rules. So clearly there is recognition of the value of some of those, and I think monster rolls are definitely one of those things that's huge. I'll have to check. I haven't seen the critical hit, but I've heard several different variations of how to do skill challenges. I have my own thoughts about how to do skill challenges. I'm trying to put that together if I ever get moving on my own rule set, which should be done in about 150 years at the pace I'm going. But it's I have a different take on what I want to do for skill challenges. My biggest complaint with skill challenges is I don't like that the DM is trying to anticipate what the players can do. I much prefer when the DM is putting together an obstacle for the players and the players get to decide how they're going to solve the problem. So I wish the skill challenges focused more on just the DM defining the scope of the challenge, but not getting into the details of trying to anticipate all the different ways the players might possibly solve that challenge. And I think to me, that's the failing with how they put skill challenges together. And I think, a lot of, looking at some of the comments that you hear, and this is one of the complaints about skill challenges too, is that, and this goes back to the complaint that we hear all the time that, fourth edition doesn't include any role playing. And I've always wanted to go through like the fifth edition books and the third edition books and kind of add up the page counts and say, okay, how many pages of each of these books deal with combat versus how many pages of these books deal with other things like role playing. And I've never actually done it, but I would be willing to bet that most of all of the versions of the game deal with combat, because that's the thing that needs the most rules to figure out the combat. Role playing, and I think someone says it in one of these reviews, role playing is just role playing. It's just people talking. So you don't need a lot of rules to determine how someone's going to talk. If someone has something to say and they're going to negotiate something as their character, you don't really need to put rules around that. I think skill challenges are a nice way to cover specific circumstances where you want to try to quantify an encounter that might be like that. But I don't think you need it for most situations. I think if you're just going to have a role-playing encounter, then just have a role-playing encounter. Francesca, I just saw your comment that as a programmer, you love how fourth edition is structured. That was what was mentioned earlier in this review, and I agree. I'm someone who likes that structure, and it leaves very little room for people to miss the important details. Because if you've got your books written in a way that's more prosaic, where you've got to filter through all this narrative and flowery text to find the rule, that's just asking for there to be confusion. That's one of the things I hear people complain about fifth edition so much, is that the rules are ambiguous. They're not very clear. I think that might actually be my poll question tomorrow, something like that. But yet people complain that fourth edition is too rigid and too structured. And I was like, well, what do you want? Do you want, you're complaining that fifth edition is not structured enough, but fourth edition is too structured. So, you can't please everybody, I guess. And Drudenfoot's that was one of the things with the stat blocks that I always, or the XP budgeting, is that I remember when I was getting into fourth edition and I was exploring Pathfinder and 3.5 and stuff, and I realized it had this CR level, and I always felt that, and that was one of the things people complained about. They complained that there were no CR levels in fourth edition, but in hindsight, looking back on that, I feel like the XP budget is a much better tool for assessing your encounters and when you're building them, to make sure that you're building them appropriately. So, at the time, it was presented to me from all these people that were fans of Pathfinder and 3.5 that the lack of a CR was a bad thing in fourth edition. But I've come to think of it completely the opposite way. I feel that the lack of a CR is perfectly fine, that doing the XP budgeting like it does in fourth edition is much better. Running the skill challenges, that was one of the things I always had. Well, and I'll tell you, when I first played D&D, and I was playing out of the red box, and it had an encounter where you're having to like negotiate with a white dragon or something, and it just confused me to no end because I didn't understand it. And so I don't feel that skill challenges did, certainly the way they were put together, I don't think they accomplished what they were wanting. And it was confusing for new players, and it wasn't something that experienced players really needed. So again, it goes back to, I like the idea. I just don't think they were implemented very well. And I think there's better ways to do it. Role-playing chess. That's interesting. I could see that. That would be an interesting thing to watch, I think. It's kind of like playing one of the games that I like to play is Gloom. I don't know if anybody's played the card game Gloom, where you're trying to do the stuff to basically kill your family that you're playing. You play a different family, and then you have to play cards to try to do things that knock all of them down to basically 0 hit points and kill them. But the fun thing about Gloom is that as you do it, you kind of are supposed to be telling a story. So you're not just playing the card, but you're telling a story about what's happening to your characters in this. And that's the type of thing that happens with D&D, is that it all depends on who's playing the game. And some people really embrace that. And I love playing Gloom. I think Gloom is great because you get to just be creative and do that little improv thing where you make up this story as you're going, and you come up with these off the wall things to explain why this thing happened to your particular family members on this card. And the same thing with D&D. When I'm the dungeon master, I like to be able to improv and come up with a story. And, I love getting into those role-playing encounters where we're trying to figure out what the solution is. And I've got to make up a character on the fly. Those are the really fun things for me. But it's not for everybody. I know that, the rest of my family doesn't like the game Gloom because it's too much pressure to put on them. They don't care for that. So, it all depends on what you want. So if I think it's the same as everything else. Every time we hear a complaint about one thing, there's another person that says that it's that they're complaining the opposite way. There's not enough role playing in 4th edition. Well, there's too much role playing in 5th edition. I don't know if it's been ever worded that way, but that's the type of situation we get into. So nobody, you can't please everybody is the crux of it. Yeah, Drudenfuss, the Dungeon Master's Guide 2, that is my favorite DM guide of all of Dungeons and Dragons, and I think they did a great job in that one, trying to expand on skill challenges. And I like that particular book, they give you a whole mess of examples of it. So you get the background of what they are. And if you take that in concert with the descriptions that they have in the first Dungeon Master's Guide, you can kind of get a better feel for what you're supposed to do. But then in the second Dungeon Master's Guide, you get I swear there's 10 different examples of skill challenges that from very easy to the very difficult with different scenarios that you can do. So that gives you, to me, that having the examples is really what's helpful for me when I'm trying to create my own, is to see how they've put it into practice in other ways. So those examples in that book are really great. Hey, Sean, I'm glad you saw the review. So thank you. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? I think so then we got the XP rewards. Oh, that was the other thing he mentions here that I thought was interesting, is he mentions how it's only a small mention in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It talks about in 4th edition, talks about milestone advancement, and that, you have XP advancement, but then it had just a couple paragraphs where it mentions that you can do advancement using milestones, and that every 8 to 10 encounters was one milestone, and then you can advance to the next level. And I find it interesting that now milestone advancement is just the norm. When I've done polls asking people the question about how you do character advancement, most people just do milestones. Everything is just built around either the story milestones or just simply a number of encounters. So I just find it interesting. Another thing that kind of originated in 4th edition, just as an aside, and now that's basically the standard way that you do character advancement. I personally like the idea of doing XP. Milestones are convenient if you're telling a story-based campaign. Milestones are good to keep everybody at the same level and moving. So they have their place, but I also like the idea of XP. It's very, very old school style of D&D of having to earn XP, and I feel that there's something to be said for players needing to keep track of their XP to try to, work their way up to the next level. So I like both systems, but again, 4th edition kind of introduced us to the whole milestone thing. And, I'm not saying that to claim that this stuff is original 4th edition. Nobody ever thought of that before, but it did have a reference to milestone advancement that now has become the standard. He's got a couple other things in here about the Dungeon Master's Guide. I mean, it goes into a lot of detail in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's just such a great book. But, and I'll kind of gloss over a couple of things. The one thing that I did like is that he has a little thing where he talks about Fallcrest and the Nintervale. And I've talked at length about the Nintervale. I love that they have the whole Fallcrest section at the end of the Dungeon Master's Guide. So as you're going through this book and learning how to be a dungeon master for 4th edition, at the end of the book, it actually has a whole city that you can play with some encounters that you can use, as though it's a published adventure. I mean, it is a published adventure, but it's the final chapters of the book. So, and then really his biggest complaint about the Dungeon Master's Guide is that it's the shortest of the 3 books. It's only 224 pages. So, and I would agree with that. Those are my favorite core books, is the Dungeon Master's Guide. So it's just disappointing when they don't get as much content as some of the other ones. But I tell you, they jam so much into that 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide that, I couldn't have expected them to put anything more in it. So. Hey Bob, yeah, Nintervale is a really great setting. I've got a video on that as well. That I think what the thing I love about the Nintervale, I love several things about the Nintervale, but it's always so intimidating to run these other campaign settings. If you're going to run Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or any of these other ones, even Eberron, which is relatively new, but there's so much in there. When you've got these entire books with all this lore that's in there, you're bound to run across tables where everyone is an expert on it. And, I know for me, like running Waterdeep is a nightmare as a dungeon master, because here I am, I've been playing the game for about 15 years or so. And it's like, there's no way that I'm going to know all the same things that somebody who's been playing the game for 20 years or more knows. And so when you go down to this section of the town and I tell you that this is what it smells like and this is what it feels like and everything, and you're going to be like, what are you talking about? That's not what the section of town is like. So, to try to have to know all of that stuff, all of those details for settings that have been around forever is just super intimidating. But Nintervale was new and it had just enough to get you started, but it also had these gaps in the information that you were provided so that you could fill in with whatever you wanted, and nobody could tell you that you were wrong, because whatever you came up with was going to be right. So I almost feel that it would be, rather than continuing and perpetuating these same campaign settings with every single edition of the game, it seems like it would be better to just start each version of the game with brand new campaign settings, so that you don't have all of that baggage that the DMs have to try to sift through in order to run the campaign properly. But that's one of my favorite things with Nintervale. I think it was just great. I need to get Threats to the Nintervale is one of the things that I have, the Monster Vault, but Threats to the Nintervale is one of the books that I have not yet got. I have a PDF of it, but I've not really looked at it. and I want to get the physical book. So I've got it on my wish list at Noble Knight Games. So, but yeah, anything that has to do with the Ninter Vale is one that I'm interested in, because I just love all the details about the setting. I wish they had one book that was, here's the campaign setting for Ninter Vale, but it's kind of scattered across several different books, which, eventually they probably would have consolidated all that into a single release, but we never got around to it. And it's just a real shame they didn't bring that one over into 5th edition. So let's see, let's wrap this one up. So we get into the monster manual at that point, and he kind of has a lot of the same things that he had with the other books. He loves the artwork. He loves the stat blocks. He loves the layout of the monsters. He liked the fact that we touched on this earlier, that there's all these different monsters to choose from, so that you've got a whole bunch of different goblins that you can use. And so you can pick exactly the right ones to use in your encounter. You're not limited to just like a couple different goblins, and then you gotta, just make them fit as best you can. So, definitely something I would agree with there. And he goes into some more details about specific monsters. I didn't dig too far into that. He mentions how you had recharge powers, where you could roll the dice and determine whether or not you get to use that power again. I like those. I actually used those as a house rule for some of the daily powers, because I felt like it was unfair. So there's some daily powers that they don't have the miss attribute, and you don't, or whatever. It was resilient, or there was some feat attribute that you had on powers that meant that you could use it again if you missed. Some of them have an actual miss effect, but there were some that didn't have either. And so I would use the recharge, as a homebrew, to try to make it so that you didn't just lose it. I always get frustrated when you try to use a power and you just lose it because your dice didn't cooperate with you. Damage resistance. They liked that it got away from actually a number, like in 3.5 in Pathfinder. Your damage resistance is like a number, like a -5 resistance, -2 resistance. This is just a flat, you're either immune, resistant, or vulnerable. And we have that in 5th edition now too. So that one carried forward into 5th edition. And then he misses that there wasn't as much flavor text for the monsters. I'd have to go back and look at the monster manual. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. I think there's quite a bit of flavor text, at least for some monsters. Maybe there's some that it's not, but I feel like there's a fair amount of flavor text. But that's, kind of something that he was lamenting about. But overall, so this is again, for those that maybe came in a little late, this review was one that was published on June 6, 2008, the day that 4th edition was released. This person stayed up all night and looked through all 3 of the core rule books that were released that day and jotted down their thoughts at it. And so kind of going through all that, summarizing it, bottom line is, he loved the layout of the books, the physical design. He loved the way that they were written, lots of white space, very clear text, easy to read. Liked that it was a game created for dungeon masters, and so much better than in the prior editions. This one was a game that, for a dungeon master to be able to write a campaign and an encounter, clearly right from the beginning, that was something that he spotted, and it's something that I still recognize with 4th edition as a benefit. And bottom line is, it looked amazing at a first glance, and he was excited to start playing it. So this is all based on just reading through the books, but so that's the first review that we're going to look at tonight. And I think the consensus there is, there's a lot of stuff that, this person approached it with a very open mind in looking at everything. There wasn't a lot that they looked at that they said, that doesn't sound very good. Now, granted, this person hadn't played the game, that this was just reading through the books, but at least in reading through the books, they seemed pretty optimistic about how the game was going to play. So I think it's it's interesting review for someone taking it as their first pass, looking through the books on the day that they were released. So and there's a lot of things that they point out that I feel are good things about the game. Oh yeah, Sean. So there's a whole section about creating monsters. That's something I have not done a whole lot of in my years of playing Dungeons and Dragons, is making monsters. I've made a few, but they're more just kind of slight variations on existing monsters. So I don't really have a lot of experience creating like new monsters from scratch. I think I've maybe tried it a couple times, but not with any regularity to be able to judge that this rule is good and this one's not so good or anything like that. So, but yeah, so I know that there is a whole section in the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide for creating monsters and creating monster templates and all this stuff. So again, more stuff that is just really great for dungeon masters to run the game. And that's one of my complaints with the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. You know, it's got a whole section in there about planes. And I just feel like that's just a waste of space for somebody that is just is picking up the game for the first time. I don't know that I've ever spent more than 5 minutes reading through the chapter on all the multiverse and the planes. Some people, I'm sure I'm not saying it's not valid or irrelevant, but it just doesn't seem like it belongs in the core Dungeon Master's Guide. It seems like that should be something that comes in a later Dungeon Master's Guide or something. So. Yeah, I love the Epigelian. I love the Monster Vault and the DM kit. Those are actually two of my first. I think I had those before I actually got the Dungeon Master's Guide, the actual Dungeon Master's Guide book, because I like the fact that they came with tokens for using on the battle maps, because I was coming in brand new. I didn't have any minis of any kind, and it was a good way for me to get some tokens that I could use for the encounters. So I loved having all those. My one complaint about those is that the monster tokens didn't say what the monster was on them. It had a picture of the monster, but it didn't say what it was. And so it really easily got mixed up where you didn't know what that monster was, and you'd have to like try to find the picture of that monster in the book to match it up with the token. And I don't know why they didn't just print the name of the monster on the token. But you know, hey, if that's my biggest complaint, then you know, it's not bad. All right, let's, 5th edition is definitely for players. 4th edition is the Dungeon Master's game, and 5th edition is the player's game. They definitely focused on that. I keep hearing that with the 2024 rules that they are going to put some more focus on the Dungeon Master again. I mean, Chris Perkins specifically had a video talking about the problems they had with the Dungeon Master's Guide in 5th edition, and that they were going to try to fix that. I have not seen anything to support that they are actually going to follow through on that, but I'm crossing my fingers that when the 2024 rules come out, we're going to get a Dungeon Master's Guide that is much better than the one we got for 5th edition. I don't know if it can live up to what they've put out for 4th edition, but we'll see. All right, so that is that review. So that review was on the day that it was released. The next review that I found is from Sly Flourish, who I know is still around. Sorry, I scrolled to the bottom here. Let me get back to the top. And obviously provides lots of great products. I have the Lazy Dungeon Masters book, and I think the Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, and there's a workbook. So he's got some really great products out there for Dungeon Masters. So clearly he's coming at this from a Dungeon Master's perspective as well. You can see that this one was from July 3rd, 2008. So basically a month after the books were released. He is putting together his thoughts on what he thinks about 4th edition. So I didn't spend as much time reading through this review as I did with the other one, but there's some pretty interesting things in this review. I find it really interesting that he says right away how he got frustrated with 3.5 and how long it took to get through combat in 3.5, and makes a comment that he thinks that 4th edition combat is faster than 3.5. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, one of the biggest complaints that we've even talked about here is that people say that 4th edition combat it just takes too long. But here's somebody a month into 4th edition being released, and they're happy that the combat in 4th edition runs so much faster than it did in 3.5. Now, I never ran 3.5, so I don't know if what happened, if that was really a thing. Is the 3.5 combat actually much slower than 4th edition, or was it just perception? So it was an interesting comment when I saw that. It goes against a lot of what you hear about that 4th edition is so slow, when here he's saying it's actually, it may be slow, but it was an improvement over 3.5, at least in his mind at this time. But he does mention that he likes that it allows him to, 4th edition allows him to run the kinds of adventures that he likes to play. So because of the way that it's got, the rules are set up, again, each table is going to be different. And so not everyone is going to want to play the style of game that 4th edition is geared towards. In this particular case, it seems, it was the type of play that he does want to play. So then he gets into a whole section where he talks about what makes 4th edition great. Oh yeah. So Amy, that's true. So the math is quicker, because we were talking about how you roll just the same die and you don't have to figure out if it's a saving throw or if it's something else. It's always going to be the same kind of mechanic. But because those powers have different things that you can do, the different tactics that you have, that is what slows it down. Now, I would argue that I've played a lot of 5th edition and Pathfinder as well. And to me, that just comes down to more the players not prepping their turn. If you're sitting there and you do your thing, and then you've got several minutes before it circles back around to you again. And in that time, you haven't looked ahead to try to figure out what your next move is going to be. And then on the start of your turn, you then start to say, well, let me see what I'm going to do. And then you start reading through all your powers. That's no different than a 5th edition or 3.5 or Pathfinder with somebody saying, well, let me look and see what spells I have. And you see it all the time. To me, that's not really an edition thing. That's a player thing, and needing to kind of, get them to move a little faster. So, he again, just like with the last review, he mentions that the rules are simplified. So he likes that it's a consistent attack, always a D20, no saving throws. You're just going to go against AC, fortitude, will, or reflex. And then he says that all the classes are fun to play, which this is a big thing for me with 4th edition. I love the fact that no matter what kind of class I want to make, I could play any character I want. It took me a while when I first was getting into the game, and was playing like Pathfinder, that I never wanted to play a wizard or a spellcaster, because the complexity that went with being a spellcaster was just too much for me to deal with. I didn't want to have to I wanted to play a spellcaster, but it was just, I didn't want to have to deal with the complexity of it, and just making the character seemed like it was going to be an ordeal. But in 4th edition, you don't have that. The way that you create the characters is the same across the board. You get different options, and there's different things you can do. And there's slight differences in a wizard, because you do still have a spell book. But it's much more streamlined than in the other versions. So you can come into it and basically play any class that you want, and they're going to be super fun. And he particularly points out that clerics are, they're still the healer, but they're healers that get to also do attacks. And that's, and that's something that's nice. You kind of, you're not just, you have this thing where nobody ever wants to play the cleric, because they're just going to have to sit back there and heal. Now, some people like playing clerics, and that's fine. But now the cleric gets a piece of the action too. And they can do their thing, and they also get to do the healing, but then they can also kind of kick some butt as well. So yeah. So that's one thing that he points out. All the classes fun to play. Loves the powers. Again, that's another one that, people complain about the powers, and they specifically say that it made all the classes the same. But here at the time, we're on our second review now that we're looking at, and and he's pointing out how he loves powers. His exact words: class powers rock, and he says about how powers were an evolution of feats, that feats kind of came in to add more things to skills and to give you more cool things to do as with regard to skills. Powers takes that to another level. So he really is singing the praises of that. And he gets into kind of the same thing we had in the last review, talking about the balance between the monsters and the characters, and how you can build much more balanced encounters in 4th edition much more easily by using all those different monster types. So you've got your minions, you've got your standard level monsters, you got the elite monsters, you got leader monsters. All the monsters have these labels that help you build an encounter that's appropriate, so you don't inadvertently put too many what would be considered leader monsters in your encounter, and you're dealing with a possible total party kill. This one with 4th edition, you break that out much more granularly so that you can build the encounters exactly the way that you want them to, and it more predictively plays the way that you want them to play. He actually has 2 fourths on here. He has 4th character powers, and then he has 4th, and most importantly, that it's more fun to play. So I'm not going to argue with him on that. I don't know. In reading this particular part, he says players focus on their powers instead of digging into the minutiae of the rules. I think my takeaway from that one is, we were touching on that before, is that if you read through the 5th edition and you've got a lot of flavor text with every class feature, and buried within that flavor text is what the thing does. Somewhere in there as you're reading, it's like a word problem. You read through what this particular class feature does, and buried in there is once every long rest, you can roll a 1d4 and add it to your attack roll, amongst everything else. 4th edition separated those two things. Every power has a flavor text line at the top, and then is all the details of how to use it. So you could just completely ignore the flavor text and just do your own thing and describe it however you want, or just use that flavor text as a hint to help you describe it, a little more detail. But it's separate from the specifics, from the mechanics. You can just say, okay, here, I see exactly what this thing does. I don't have to try to read through and decipher by reading through all this other narrative as well. So that's kind of what he's pointing out here. It's something that I definitely appreciate for 4th edition, and something that he is appreciating as well. So yes, Haley, yes, that's one of my big things, is that there's a bit of an elitist view from some people that play spellcasters. They feel superior to the non-spellcasters, and they feel that they should be treated more specially. They should have more special things that they get to do because they're a spellcaster, and that the other types of characters shouldn't get to do those sorts of things. I don't understand that. To me, the game should be that, everybody gets to do really cool things. And so whether you're a spellcaster or not a spellcaster, you should still have really cool things to do. And I don't think it's beyond belief to think that if a spellcaster is somebody who has spent their life studying the arcane arts and has been able to now harness the magical energy and cast these spells, I don't think in a fantasy world it's too much of a stretch to say that somebody who is a martial character has been studying those martial arts their entire lives, and they also are able to do things that would seem fairly fantastical. I mean, I don't think it's much of a stretch, but it always comes across to me, not so much that it's a complaint about the game. It's more just that people that play spellcasters want to feel like they're special. And that other people shouldn't have the same benefits that they have. So I don't agree with that. I don't understand that, but that's the impression I get from some folks. Bard is my favorite character as well. That's Vicious Mockery is awesome. I love I think it goes along with my love of improv, that I like to be able to, with the bard, be able to do just some kind of silly things. I mean, like in the D&D movie, I love that the main character is a bard. And I think it's played perfectly. I love that movie. I think it's great. So that's one of my favorite types of characters to play. Yeah. So, I mean, the power cards are just, to me, they're just great. You only have enough fluff, to use your word, as you need to get it, to kind of get a mental image of what this thing does. And then you can go off and describe it however you want. And then the rest of it is more about the mechanics, and you got to understand what the mechanics are. And so don't bury all those mechanics inside a bunch of narrative, where it's just really hard for me to figure out what I'm supposed to do and how I can use it. Again, it comes down to, you hear people complain all the time about how the rules in 5th edition are too ambiguous, or they're unclear. You don't really know what you're supposed to do. Yet they complain about 4th edition and how the rules are too rigid and too structured. Like, well, what do you want? How do you meet in the middle there? So I personally am a fan of 4th editions. Yeah, and I'll admit that when I first was starting with 4th edition, because there's a lot of stuff in that power card. You look at all the different keywords and stuff that it has. There's a lot there to learn. But the thing is, it's all right there. And you can go to the page in the player's handbook, and it explains what every single one of those words means. So you know exactly what an at-will power is, what a standard action is, what does it mean when it says that it has a miss, what is an effect. It has all that stuff explained in one place, and it's very clear. You're not sitting there having to try to guess what all these different things mean on this power. That's a good example. So fighter is Captain America, the wizard is Doctor Strange. And they both get to do cool things. Yeah, it's exactly perfect statement there. That's what it's about, is that everybody has a role to play. It's not about, we're just all there to support the wizards, because they're the really cool characters and the rest of us just have to be here and do what the wizard said. No. That's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be collaborative, and we should all get to have cool things. So that's the good. That's the things that he says that he likes in 4th edition. But then he does have a few things that he doesn't like. So he mentions that he doesn't like that every single attack requires an attack roll, because that implies that people are going to miss more often. And then when you miss, you kind of waste your turn, and then you got to wait for everything to come around again before you can try to do something else. I don't disagree. Yeah, definitely you do have an attack roll every single time that you're doing something. I certainly know that I've played games where my dice have been just stone cold the entire night. And I would roll and I get a 7, and then that's it. And then I got to wait and go all the way around again. And then I roll and I get a 6, and it's just, I seem to spend the entire night not doing anything because my dice just do not want to cooperate. So I don't know that that's something that's unique to 4th edition. I suppose you could argue that because you have to roll for everything, you're more likely to miss. The only example he gives is that, Magic Missile is one of those that always hits in other editions, whereas in 4th edition, pre-Essentials 4th edition, you actually had to roll to see if you could hit with Magic Missile. In the Essentials, they switched it back to being an automatic hit. And I know that there's other things that just kind of hit as well, but here in 4th edition, you're gonna have to roll. I don't know that it's significant enough to say that it makes a difference, because, sure, maybe I'm less likely to hit, but I just don't know that it makes much difference. So it's, hey, Tigress. I'm glad to see you chiming in. Hope you enjoyed it while you're here. So, So that one, I get it. But I don't know that I've necessarily experienced that it's any different from other versions of the game. The number of rolls having a negative effect. Next, he talks about being built around miniatures. This is definitely one that certainly 4th edition is, because the powers are so tactical and they are built around using the things in the powers to manipulate the conditions on the battlefield. Having a visual representation of the encounter is important. And that's something that it does slow down the game. Because if every single encounter that you're doing, you require someone to pull out a battle map and sketch it out and get everybody positioned and all that. That can be a problem. And I've definitely experienced that as something that slowed down the game. Clearly, as we've mentioned before, with 4th edition, they expected to have a virtual tabletop and the technology just wasn't there yet. So, and when that didn't happen, that kind of messed with things. So, but it's, miniatures existed before 4th edition. The miniatures existed before 3rd edition. People used them going back for a long time. 4th edition simply said, let's embrace this. Let's make this even more a part of the game, because it seems like that's what people really enjoyed doing in the prior editions, and we're going to really embrace that. And so they did. Now, some folks want to say that that's a negative, and it's unfortunate. Maybe they took it too far. They swung the pendulum too far the other way, and they should have done something else. But it's... But it is what it is. That's the direction they took. And he even adds that, he's become addicted to the miniatures, and he's made a lot of investment. So it's not necessarily a problem. He can see that there's some issues with it having to be every single encounter, that it can drag it down. But he also seems to indicate that he's okay with it. So, but yeah, I can understand that one. I won't necessarily dispute that one. I do wish there were some theater of the mind rules that they had as a subset. It would be my one thing, but that's what homebrew's for, This next one I thought was interesting. He says that character creation is pretty complicated, and that you got all these modifiers that you got to keep track of, and the baseline statistics require a lot of page flipping. I've built quite a few characters on this stream, and I don't know that I've necessarily had to flip back and forth too much. Maybe, again, this review is being written only a month after the game was released. So, once you get a feel for it, it's not a big deal. I think he maybe makes a comment about that once you get some experience, it's fine. But, just starting out, maybe it's a bear. I don't know that that's necessarily the case for me, but clearly that's his experience, is that it's a little more complicated. I personally feel that of the different versions of the game, all of 4th edition's character creation process is amongst the easiest to do, because the class setup is so similar between every class. It's just the same steps that you're following, the choices that you're making. It's the same process, that you get different options, but the process you follow is the same. So I kind of disagree with that assessment. I think character creation in 4th edition is actually fairly easy. But that depends on what your expectations are. Yeah, Amy, the 4th edition combat as theater of the mind would be hard. I've thought about it myself, and it's like, with considering so much of it is based on powers, and you wouldn't want to tell somebody you can't use your power. You can't use powers during this encounter because we're just going to do theater of the mind. So, but I feel like there's a way to like generalize. I think I saw someone in another video talking about using, it might've been Dungeon Craft, about using like areas, ranges. So you're not measuring square by square by square. You're measuring more like sectors. And so if you're going to do a power that has some sort of distance requirement to it, you kind of play a little fast and loose with that rule, and you're just kind of imagining roughly where in relation to this other character am I, or this monster am I, and that's close enough. And if it's the type of encounter that you would run as Zero to the Mind, it's usually going to be one that's not as imperative. So it's not like going to be your boss monster that you're going to be doing that way. So you know, the specifics of the encounter don't necessarily matter as much in those cases, but you'd have to kind of come up with what those rules would be to make sure that it's fair and you're accounting for everything. And then I think this is where he kind of this sums it up. And this to me, I think he hit the nail on the head right off the bat. And again, we're talking about a review that was written a month after it came out. And he points out some specific complaints that he's already heard about it. And he mentions that on Amazon, a month later, the game was getting customer ratings of 3 stars out of 5. So clearly overall, the community was still kind of, middle of the road on 4th edition, because that's what the reviews that people were leaving for the book. But he then went and read through some of those reviews at the time and points out 3 things that people say is that it was too simplified and that they miss a lot and took out a lot of the stuff that they had liked in 3.5. That they had already invested too much in 3.5 and didn't want to have to switch, and that it's basically World of Warcraft on paper. We hear certainly that last one all the time these days, and we've already touched on it in one of the other reviews. But he points out that all of these come down to, not wanting to change is basically what it is. It's, to me, the whole simplified thing. Well, the big complaint about 3.5 is that it got way too complicated because you had years and years of this bloat that went with it. It got really too complicated. And so now you've come out with a version that you've streamlined, and people don't want that. They want their 3.5 the way it was. And I can understand the second one. The second one to me is the one that has the most merit because, when you look at it, you say, okay, 3rd edition came out in 2000. 3.5 came out in 2003, and 4th edition comes out in 2008. So you've only got 5 years. 2nd edition had come out in 89, and you had 11 years before 3rd edition. So an 11-year span in between you having to buy a set of core rulebooks. But then you only had 3 years before you had to buy another set of core rulebooks for 3.5, and then 5 years where now we're expecting you to buy 4th edition books. And so I can understand just some frustration at that and people not wanting to have to shell out another, chunk of change for these core rule books. So that one to me has merit. And I also I always also go back and I look at this and I say, this is 2008. And if anybody remembers 2008, the economy was crap in 2008. People were getting laid off, banks were failing, housing market was collapsing. So the notion of having free money that you could spend on a bunch of new D&D books was probably not tops on everybody's list. So that's not necessarily how it comes out, and people just say that I didn't want to have to buy new books. But I'm sure that the strength of the economy at the time had something to do with that as well. So I think that one has some merit. The World of Warcraft one on paper, that's one we've kind of talked about before. And he mentions, this is where he actually mentions that these computer games are built on tabletop role-playing games. The tabletop role-playing games came first, and the computer ones took the tabletop concept and turned it into a computer game. And as those games have developed, it's natural to think they're going to come up with ideas that are good for a tabletop game. And the tabletop games will then pull those ideas out of the video games and use them on the tabletop games. So again, it's that cycle that we talked about. So he points that out here, that it's it doesn't make much sense. So, you're saying that the D&D being too much like World of Warcraft is a bad thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just, that's just the evolution of anything is going to pull from other influences. Yeah, Sean, I agree. The game with minis has, I mean, you can go back to in the advanced D&D books and in the advanced D&D player's guide or dungeon master's guide, it actually had ads in there for a company that made minis and that you could use in your game. So the concept of minis in Dungeons and Dragons is not new. I mean, the game itself is based on their wargaming game that they had. So, you know, its origins come from using miniatures and doing battles with miniatures. And certainly the game had more theater of the mind aspects to it. And that wasn't as important of a thing in those early versions, but it was always there. It was always a thing. But then by the time you get into second edition and the second edition starts evolving, you're getting more and more minis. And by the time third edition is there, it is full on. You've got minis and then you've got Paizo coming along with their battle maps and everything. That is just part of the game at that point. So there seems to be this notion that fourth edition is what introduced minis into D&D, and that is absolutely not the case. Minis have been around forever. Fourth edition simply embraced them as the next evolution, but they had already been even embraced in 3.5 as a huge thing. So, you know, I don't get that one. I get the theater of the mind piece of it, and the powers makes it difficult, not impossible, but difficult. And I wish they would have had a little something in there to allow you to do things theater of the mind, as a one-off. But I personally love the fact that it's so tactical that you can get into your encounters and do all these things to make the movement. And I hate encounters that just turn into, you know, I hit with my sword, I hit with my battle axe, I hit with my sword, I hit with my battle axe, and you're just whacking at the, you know, and there's no movement, nobody's doing anything. And, you know, and even when you've built this nice encounter thing with terrain and everything, and people just end up reverting back to their same old stuff. Fourth edition had all these powers that made it really cool to do other things. All those non-spellcaster people could actually do cool things. And so I'm personally, one of the things that I am curious about, I have lots of things that I would like to experiment with. I'm just not sure how to go about doing it. But I'm interested in the notion of, what if I was running a table where you could play whatever version you wanted? How difficult would it be to run a game where I'm telling the story, I'm the DM and I'm running the game, but this person made a 5e character, this person made a 4e character, this person made an advanced D&D character, this person made a 3.5 character, and we're all playing the same game. And, you know, obviously there's differences, and you'd have to have some things to kind of unite some of that stuff. But in my mind anyway, I feel like it's not as big of a challenge as you might think. I feel like getting through, coming up with a way to allow people to play whatever version of the game they want for their character would actually work. Maybe I'm just crazy, but I feel like that's something that with a little bit of thought, we could come up with a way to do that. So that's one of those things that's in the back of my mind, is something that you could do. Hey, Drudenfuss, not sure if you're still there, but have a good evening. Thank you for joining. Appreciate you stopping by. All right, I think we're getting to the end of his. So he's got the biggest problem. What does he have here for the biggest problem? I think his biggest problem is just finding a game. It seems to be what his biggest problem is. So that's that, and then he goes into, you know, how you can find a game, which is fine. But this is the part that interested me, is at the end of the day, all of that stuff, you know, here it is a month into the game being released, and he still says it's his favorite game. He thinks combat is fast. He likes all the options that you have. He thinks every class is fun. So the benefits of the game outweigh the negative effects of the game. So I think that's a solid statement. So here we have our second review that we've looked at. This one now a month into the game being released, so he's had a chance to play it. And at the time, his consensus is that he believes that this is his new favorite game to play. So, we've got two people writing serious reviews, which I feel is different from somebody putting a comment on Amazon. Someone just taking a few minutes and throwing a comment on Amazon is not necessarily an accurate description of the quality of the product, in this case, the game. Somebody who takes the time with the first review where they actually read through every single one of those core rule books and put together a detailed description of what they thought about each one. And then here we have with Sly Flourish, he writes through after a month of playing the game exactly what the pros and cons of the game. I feel like these are much more objective views from people who are experienced, and and obviously everyone's experience is different. So, but I do feel that these mean something. This is somebody who took the time to do a proper review of them. And in both cases, their conclusion is that they like the game. It's not perfect, but they like the game. And I think that's the takeaway. So, there's one more review, and this one, so those two were within the first month. The first one was the first day that it was released, and then that one was a month later. The last one that I have is actually from this site called Blackgate. And again, I don't know if Blackgate is still an active site, if he still does other stuff. But this is from March of 2009. So now we're almost a year later that he is putting together this review of 4th edition. And I think what we're going to find from when I read through this is that it's a lot of the same stuff. We're seeing a lot of the same, even a year later. A lot of his conclusions that he's reaching here are the same from what people were saying in those other reviews earlier on. So just looking through it, I think it's interesting. He points out that there's no sacred cows with 4th edition. And this to me goes back to a video Matt Colville did a while ago when he was announcing the new game rules that they're putting together, is that there's a lot of stuff in D&D that people don't really use. And the only reason it's still in D&D is because it's always been in D&D. And so you feel obligated to keep that stuff just because it's always been there. And he's going to be trying to get rid of that stuff. And I feel like, based on this comment here, that's kind of maybe what they did with some of the stuff in 4th edition. They changed the way the game is played because, to get away from what was the traditional way of playing the game and try to embrace something new, a new way of playing the game. And, and that's what a lot of people complain about, the whole it's not D&D thing to me, which is just ludicrous. It's just that's the take they had on it at that time, in the same way that adding the whole D20 system was a different take on the rule set, and adding in saving throws and all the things that have evolved over time. They're just different things that you've tried. Here, they decided, let's start fresh. Let's take a lot of the stuff, but let's look at it a new way and see what we can do with it. And they didn't hold themselves back by some history that was there. So, and that's, he points that out in this first paragraph there, that he thinks that was the approach that they took. Hey, Francesco, thank you for joining us. Have a good evening. Appreciate it. Then he goes into, it gets a little bit of history of, his origins with D&D, and then starts getting into the books themselves. So he mentions that the writing quality is excellent. He thinks that it's much better than the other books. He likes that the text is easy to read. There's a lot of white space, and it just flows really nicely. So again, something that we've seen in some of the other books as well. He mentions the class powers. Again, a lot of the stuff is the same types of things that we've seen in the other reviews, but here we are a year later, and so you're interested to see, how does that change after a year of playing the game? Does that change any opinions on some of this stuff? He mentions about, that the spellcasters have ritual magic, but the spells now are still in the form of powers. Spell book is just a slightly different use in 4th edition than it does in 5th edition and the other versions of the game. So a lot of the same stuff. he mentions the skills, and we talked about this before, and I'm torn a little bit on this one. Skills in fourth edition, they advance every level because or every other level, because your skill bonus is based on half your level. So as you level up every other level, you're going to get another point to all your skills. But you don't really get much beyond that. Whereas, you look at 3.5 and Pathfinder, you're getting skill ranks at every single level, and then you're adding those. And so you're ending up with some pretty huge bonuses on some of your skills. And that allows you to really specialize in something. You can have the rogue that has a plus 18 on their, disabled device. But you can't really do that in fourth edition. The way that it's set up doesn't allow you to do that. So, that's just another take that they had with it. I don't know that he's saying that that's really good or bad. It's just a decision that they made that's a little different. And let's see, what else does he have in here? Again, he gets into the notion of combat is like a video game. But he doesn't feel that combat as a video game is necessarily a bad thing, just out of hand. It's just okay, sure, it runs like a video game. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that's just the approach that they're taking. He does indicate that we lost the craft, the profession, and the performance skills, which kind of seems to support the notion that fourth edition has de-emphasized role-playing, because you're getting rid of some of the skills that would have specifically been for someone who's doing some things during downtime, crafting an item or doing a performance, things like that. So, I think there might be some merit to that. So I won't necessarily disagree with that one. He mentions the character creation is simpler than in 3.5. Again, I absolutely agree with that one. And that it's mostly about combat. I like his comment about, and I don't know, here we go. He's talking about skill challenges. And I know we keep circling around to skill challenges, it seems like every time, but I like his comment that skill challenges are designed to be skill challenges. So what ends up happening is that you're putting together this encounter that kind of comes across as like a mini game. It's not natural. If you have a role-playing encounter where you have to try to negotiate with the guard at the gate to let you in, then if you just do that as a role-playing encounter, you just kind of go with it, and you have an idea of what some of the difficulties that it's going to present to the party, and then they have to come up with ways to solve it, then it just feels natural. But with a skill challenge and the way that they're written for 4th edition, it almost seems like the intention is that you stop the game, and now we're going to go off to the side and we're going to do this little skill challenge mini game for a little bit. And then once we're done with that, then we'll go back to the main game. So that was his take on it, which I thought was interesting, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. I kind of I think that is a pretty good take. That the again, the idea of skill challenges is nice, but the way that they're put together is a little bit clunky. So anyway, I thought that was a pretty good take. Yeah, so the skill points, I mean, that was always the thing, is that you get this two sets of people. You get the players that say that they want to be able to make a character that is highly specialized in something. And so I'm going to take all these points and I'm going to put them into disabled device or athletics or acrobatics or whatever it is. And I'm going to be amazing at this thing. And then you have other people who want things to not be so off balance. You don't want to have that. They say they don't want to have those characters that are so super powerful at this one thing that, nobody else even has a chance to do that thing. And, when everybody should have a chance to do that thing. So again, it all comes down to the table that you're playing at. Everybody is going to have a different thing that they like to do. And, the 3.5 system might work well for one set of tables, and another one is not gonna work so well. You can certainly homebrew some of those rules to limit things if you wanted to. If your table doesn't like there being super powered characters that have like 18 plus 18 in athletics, then you can set some rules to try to limit that. If that works best for your table, it's all up to you. And I think he actually makes a comment in this review talking about how rules are sort of guidelines. They're, you don't need to follow them to the letter. You can do what you need to do for your table. Let's see. Again, he goes into character roles. This one, he specifically points out that this is, again, a video I had made about character roles, is that this is what characters do anyway. If you're a rogue, why are you a rogue? Well, you're a rogue because you want sneak attack. Why are you a barbarian? You're a barbarian because you want to rage. There's certain things that you want to do as those characters. And no matter what else you get, at the end of the day, the rogue is going to try to use sneak attack. And they may have other things that they can do, but it will always come down to sneak attack. And so the fact that 4th edition simply put a label on that role and said that the rogue is a striker. And, that was, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Why are you forcing me into this box? It's like, well, nobody forced you into the box. That's just how those characters are played. A rogue is generally played this way. And we just are now putting a name on it so that we can make it easier as you're building your encounters and building your party to better understand what the distribution needs to be. And so, if you know that you're trying to build a party and you've got a defender, a striker, a controller, and a leader, great. You've built the party that's well balanced. But if you don't have those labels and you're trying to just speculate that my cleric, my party that consists of 3 clerics and a wizard is somehow a balanced party, well, okay, then that's the chance you take. But so anyway, I find it interesting. He points out something that the roles are they're just how people play those anyway, and it just puts a label on it. And I guess people don't like labels, so. Yeah, the time pressure for skill challenge is important. That's one of those things, and I do this with with regular encounters too, is that you add that extra little variable to keep it interesting. If you don't have that extra pressure, sometimes it just kind of drags on because people kind of lose interest. But if you got the rope holding the cage over the lava is slowly burning, and the person you've been sent to rescue is going to fall into the lava pit, that adds a little bit of tension to it. So all those little types of details, whether it's a skill challenge or in a combat encounter, I think are good to add. Yeah, the failure state for skill challenges is the big thing. That's true of any skill check. You hear about it all the time, that people say roll for roll an athletics check, and it's like, well, why? If you don't have something for what's going to happen if they fail that athletics check, I don't think that just failing the athletics check and saying, well, you don't succeed is a good enough thing. I feel like if you're going to have somebody roll a check, there should be an actual consequence. If you fail this check, that means you're going to trip and fall on your face and take 1 point of damage or something. There should be a consequence to things. Otherwise, there's not really much need. We're talking about fantastical heroes, and that have pretty good athletics. And if they're wanting to be able to jump over that rock, I don't think you need to have them roll an athletics check unless you're going to establish that there's some consequence for it. And the same extends to your skill challenges as well. Yeah. They hated 4th edition because he told them the truth. Yep, exactly. So they told him exactly, hey, you know what? You've been playing a rogue for 10 years and that rogue is a striker. And they're like, what? Don't tell me what my character is. You don't know my character. So that seems to be the perception that I get out of it. So then he goes to, so he talks about the roles. Then he gets into healing, and he likes that the healing is streamlined. So you get healing surges. You're not rolling a 1d4 or 1d8 or anything like that, which is nice because, I have that problem with 5th edition is that, I got a healing potion. All right, what is it? And because it's a potion of healing, a potion of greater healing, a potion of superior healing. All right, what was the dice rolls? That's 1d4 plus 4 and then 1d8 plus 8. Whatever. This is just healing surges. It's just you're spending healing surges. It's very simple, and there's no, all the complexity you might have had with combat and the battle mats and things. There were a lot of things that also were streamlined in the game. And so here he is talking about that healing surges are actually a nice thing to make it really easy to do healing without having to think about it. And then we get to the mats and miniatures. I think we've covered this one at length. He mentions that the simplest encounters are difficult to run unless you have a battle mat. So, and like we've said, I think we all are in agreement that is the case. Theater of the Mind was not really a thing in 4th edition. It was definitely designed to be run on a battle map. So that's just part of the game. And unfortunately we didn't get the virtual tabletop we were supposed to get. Some Theater of the Mind rules would have been nice, but yeah, he does point out that it's, that is kind of a little bit of a problem, but he also mentions that, no game system is perfect. Every game system has some problems with it. So just the fact that we identified one problem in 4th edition does not mean that you just take it and throw it away. He then gets into the whole MMO, and this is where he actually says, to those complaining that it's too much like an MMO, he asks, why is that bad? That just because it feels like, an MMO does not mean that it is bad. Just because you don't like this rule does not mean that it's bad. Just because it doesn't do this very well does not mean that it's bad. The same applies whether it's 4th edition, 5th edition, 3rd edition, 1st edition, whatever it is. Every game will have good things and bad things. And so there's no way that you can claim that just because one of them does or doesn't do something, that is the deal breaker for everybody. Maybe it is for you, but not for everybody. And I think that was, so that's basically the gist of this one. He did have one. He actually has some comments on this one as well. But he, so his general consensus is that he is frustrated with certain things, such as he feels that the story aspects of the game are being left behind, but he does enjoy the game. And he finds it to be a very well balanced game, and the rules are very streamlined, but it is combat heavy. I don't disagree with that, but the person, I think it was in the comments here. Let me see. Yeah. So one of the comments down here talking about, the role playing and stuff. Now I'll never find the comment in question, but he mentions the fact that the reason you don't need a lot of, 4th edition doesn't have a lot of rules to cover role playing. So, but you don't need rules for role playing. Role playing is about you present the party with a challenge, and then they talk about it and they figure out a solution. There's not a lot of rules to be had. You need a lot of rules for combat because there's so many variables that come into play, and it's very complicated to do. And the same is true in every edition. I think if we counted up the number of pages of 5th edition and 3rd edition and 4th edition that were for combat versus something else, we'd find that there's just as many pages about combat in 4th edition, in 3rd edition and 5th edition as there are in 4th edition, because role playing is just not something that you need a lot of rules for. Clearly, things like the powers and stuff, are combat based, but nothing says you have to go into combat. Nothing says that when you burst into the room and you see a bunch of goblins sitting there that you have to attack them. No, there's no rules in 4th edition that tell you can't try to talk to them and negotiate something with them. So I've never understood why that was always believed somehow that in 4th edition you're supposed to just attack. That doesn't make any sense to me. It seems that's a table making a decision that we're just going to play combat all the time, not really something that's tied to any particular rule. So, so no edition has rules for Dragonborn getting their head stuck in a hollow tree, but you made it happen in 4th edition. Okay, good. And I'm assuming there was some kind of skill challenge to try to get unstuck from said tree. Is that depending on what breath weapon you're using, that that could work. If your breath weapon is poison, then that might just be more trouble. So, but all right, there we are. That is the 3 reviews that I did my search and I came up with. So we had, the first one was the day that D&D 4th edition was released. The next one was a month later. And then this one was a full year later. And I think what I find interesting in looking at these is that, one, these aren't just the Amazon reviews of just people, putting their 2 cents in. These are people who took the time to actually write up a full, meaningful review of them. And what I find remarkable in them is that all 3 of them are very similar in the things that they liked and the things that they weren't crazy about. But in all cases, they acknowledge that no game is perfect. And despite some of the limitations that 4th edition has, they still love playing the game. And the things that we hear the most about these days, about how it's like a video game, all the classes were the same, it was way too rigid, all these things that we keep hearing today as things that are bad about 4th edition. If you look at these reviews, what we see is that those things were not referred to as bad. They were acknowledged that they exist, but people looked at them and said, but that's fine. But those things make the game good. Those are things that we took elements from video games and applied it to a role-playing game. Awesome. Those are some great things that we pulled from those video games. There was a reason people like playing them on the video games. Now I get to do them on the tabletop, and, we took the classes and we really simplified how you build those classes. And we made it real streamlined, so it's really simple to create your characters. We made it so it's really focused on the dungeon master and that they can build encounters and campaigns really easily, and they can run the games really easily. So everything that I see consistently in all 3 of these reviews is that a lot of the stuff that people complain about today and say as bad were actually considered good things at the time. And in no way is that saying that people back then thought that 4th edition was perfect. There were several things in all of these reviews that people did not like about 4th edition, but they also acknowledge that they have things they don't like about other editions as well. And so, there was nothing in any of these reviews where I look at it and say, people are looking at 4th edition right off the bat and saying that it's terrible. Some people certainly were, but some people say 5th edition was terrible right off the bat. Some people are already saying that they're not going to like the 2024 revision. So there's no stopping that. But somehow 4th edition got this reputation, and just, now it's just been perpetuated. And in honesty, it's being perpetuated baselessly, because a lot of the stuff that's being used as complaints about it are, one, coming from people that in a lot of cases have never even played the game. And they're simply just perpetuating things that they've heard, even though they have no real world experience with it. But going back to the source, that is not how it started out. Even a year after the game was released, there were still reviews saying about how it was a good game, and had a lot of great stuff in it. And honestly, as we've said before, it's just a shame that it didn't catch on, and we never got more revisions that could have built on it and maybe addressed some of the concerns a little better, and made it something special. Instead, it just got scrapped. And we went to 5th edition, which I love 5th edition too. I don't have, it's not perfect for different reasons, but I really do like some 4th edition, and I like seeing that the reviews at the time were actually very positive. And the thing is for me is that it's like, this is why I wanted to go back and look at these reviews. These are untainted reviews. These are not people 20 years later looking back on it. Well, 15 years later looking back on it, and with Mandela effect, and where it's not accurate memories of the game. This is at the time. These are people at the time where this was the only game out there for D&D, and they're giving their 2 cents. And this is the write-ups that we're getting. And I think that's like the most accurate perception of them that we can get is from people at that time who knew the game, who played the game at that moment and giving their 2 cents. And I think that's great. So, yeah. And so that's where we are. That was, what I wanted to do today was go through that with everybody. So really great, commentary. I appreciate all the comments out there. Really good discussion from everyone. I hope you enjoyed this one. I had a lot of fun with it. And other than me looking through, I didn't look through these reviews until earlier today, so I didn't know what we were getting into. But I was kind of surprised, actually. I thought that some of them would be a little more negative than they were, but I was a little surprised that they took the more objective tone that they did. And I think it just shows how the game has a worse reputation today than what it actually had at the time. And I think it's unfair for that. I think it's just like any version. It's not perfect, but it isn't as bad as what people claim that it is. So, but I had a great time today. Appreciate everybody's feedback and input into everything. So I hope you had a great time as well. So thank you for all the participation in the chat. I don't know what we're going to do next week. But if you have any thoughts about what you'd like to do next week, I am open to those ideas. So please do put those in the comments. If you want to help me out, please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Please make sure you like the video. That is something that will really help me with the algorithm. And if you want to sign up for the newsletter or use some of the affiliate links to help out the channel, those are all down in the description as well. So please do, consider that if you do enjoy the video and want to help me out. So, but I had a great time. Thank you everyone for joining and participating and staying pretty late into the morning, it seems, for some of you. So I do appreciate you doing that and joining in with the community. So, but with that, I guess we will end it there. And until next time, I hope everybody has a great week, great weekend, and we will see you again next week. Thank you, everybody. Take care.